Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. The Reich had nothing left to fight with and nowhere left to fight. And yet on May 6th, Germany sent its senior general to Allied headquarters not to surrender, but to negotiate. He thought there was still a deal to be made. Eisenhower had one answer ready and delivered it without leaving his office. This is how the last German negotiation lasted one night and ended with 5 words. In the last week of the war in Europe, Berlin fell, and Hitler died, and Admiral Dönitz took charge from Flensburg with one calculation left. He intended to surrender to the Western Allies while continuing the fight in the East, saving as many German troops and civilians as possible from the Red Army. Montgomery had already accepted a regional capitulation on the 4th of May at Lüneburg Heath, which told Dönitz that partial surrenders might still be on the table. He sent Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeburg to Reims first, with authority to offer the Western forces and nothing else. Friedeburg arrived on May 5th and walked into Allied headquarters expecting to negotiate. Smith met him in a plain room and pointed to a map showing the German army collapsing on every front. Friedeburg tried to argue, then tried to appeal to Western solidarity against the Soviets, and then broke down and wept. He said he didn't have authority to sign a total surrender and asked to radio Dönitz. Smith told him to do exactly that, and to tell Dönitz to send someone who could actually sign. Friedeburg's tears had confirmed one thing: the Germans knew their position. What Dönitz sent next was not a man who would cry. Colonel General Alfred Jodl arrived the evening of May 6th. He was the chief of operations of the German High Command, 6 years at Hitler's right hand, and he carried himself accordingly, uniform pressed, monocle in place, Iron Cross at his collar. The destination was Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, set up in the Collège Moderne et Technique, a working school building turned command post. A stenographer adjusted her pad, while an interpreter sorted carbons and pencils on the table. Eisenhower stayed upstairs. He had delegated the talks to Smith because this was not a meeting of equals, but the enforcement of a policy already decided. The document was short and in clear language: all German land, sea, and air forces under the High Command, with hostilities stopping at 23:01 Central European Time on May 8th. That delay was deliberate, enough time to push ceasefire orders down every chain of command across Europe. A Soviet representative, Major General Ivan Susloparov, sat on the Allied side as a witness because Moscow required that any surrender bind Germany to stop fighting the Red Army too. The hammer attached to that document was Eisenhower's ultimatum: sign for all fronts now, or the Western lines close. No more German troops crossing west to surrender. No more civilians streaming through Allied positions to escape east. And at that moment, hundreds of thousands of people were on those roads, moving on foot and in carts toward American lines. Closing that border was not an abstraction. It was a sentence passed on everyone still moving west. Jodl opened with a proposal to stage the surrender by fronts, west first and east later. Smith cut it off and put the single document on the table. The clock on the wall ticked once, loud in the pause. Jodl switched to the argument of humanity: columns of civilians, wounded men in trains, soldiers who would be slaughtered if ordered to stop and stand. Smith did not shift. Eisenhower's written ultimatum was already in his folder, and he read it in full. Sign now for all fronts, or the West shuts its gates and Allied armies resume their advance. There was no comfort in it, and no room between the words. A chair leg creaked as someone leaned back and then forward again. Jodl asked for time to radio Dönitz. The set was brought in through chef controls, so every signal was logged. He dictated his request and underlined the threat. No more Germans would reach Western lines if he refused. The operator's fingers hovered over the keys, then settled as the transmission ended. The room waited for a reply while the clock walked toward morning. A typewriter started and stopped down the corridor. A cuff was tugged straight and left alone. The answer arrived, and Jodl read authorization to sign on behalf of the German High Command. The color left his face as the meaning settled. There would be no split. The war would end in one piece. A fountain pen was uncapped and held without moving. We are in that room at 2 a.m. with the pen still in Jodl's hand. If you want to hear how this breaks, subscribe before the signature goes down. Chairs are arranged around the table, but there is no ceremony and no brandy. At 2:41 on May 7, 1945, Jodl signs the act of military surrender for the German High Command. Smith signs for the Allied Expeditionary Force. Susloparov and Seves add their names as witnesses. The scratch of the nib on paper is the only sound between signatures. Jodl then asks to speak. He delivers a short statement about German suffering, 5 years of war, the weight his people have carried. He does not mention the countries Germany destroyed. He does not mention the camps Allied troops had been uncovering for weeks. The room gives him nothing back except silence, and he stands in it until he understands there is no answer coming. Then Eisenhower sends for him. Jodl walks down the hall to Eisenhower's office. He expects a handshake, soldier to soldier, the old courtesy between enemies who have fought well. Eisenhower is standing behind his desk. He does not offer a chair. He does not offer his hand. He asks 2 questions. Does Jodl understand the terms, and will the German forces obey them? The desk blotter shows a faint ring where a cold cup sat earlier. Jodl says yes to both. Eisenhower dismisses him. Jodl turns and walks out, his heels counting the steps in the quiet corridor. Eisenhower goes back to his staff room. The tension that had held the building for 2 days breaks at once. Staff crowding in, someone finding a bottle, an aide uncapping a pen just to have something to do with his hands. He held up the 2 gold fountain pens in a V for the photographers, and for the first time in days, his face looked like the war was actually over. Then he sat down, read the long, formal messages his aides had drafted for Washington, and set them aside. He took a piece of paper. 5 words. The mission of this Allied force is fulfilled. The message goes out over Allied circuits that have been running since Normandy. The ceasefire took effect at 23:01 on May 8th. The Soviets insisted on a second formal signing in Berlin-Karlshorst on May 8th to 9th, where Field Marshal Keitel signed for Germany again. Moscow marked the end by its own clock a day later. Records vary on the exact count of German forces that crossed west before the lines could be fully controlled. The joint procedure mattered because it closed the last opening for a separate peace, kept the coalition intact at the moment it was most tempted to fracture, and cut off the westward movement of German forces before it could complicate Allied lines. Jodl was arrested, tried at Nuremberg, and hanged in 1946. Friedeburg did not wait for a trial. He took poison 2 weeks after the surrender. Eisenhower became President of the United States 8 years later. Eisenhower's refusal to offer courtesy was not theater. It was a statement that the men who had run the Reich would not leave that room with their dignity restored by a handshake. The war ended the way it needed to, without ambiguity, without a soldier's peace, and without a single word more than necessary. For more unvarnished moments where one decision fixed an ending, subscribe